A 2-goal lead on the road against a team they completely outplayed for most of the night. And somehow the Toronto Maple Leafs still found a way to lose. This isn't a one-off. This isn't bad luck. This is a pattern that's been repeating itself night after night for an entire season. The Toronto Maple Leafs have a problem. And by the end of this video, the whole NHL is going to understand exactly what it is. This isn't your typical Leafs choke in the playoffs again story. This is something different and arguably much worse. This is the story of a team that came into the season with Stanley Cup aspirations and turned into one of the worst defensive units in the entire National Hockey League. A team that couldn't hold a lead, couldn't string together wins, couldn't protect its own net no matter who was wearing the pads. Let's break down exactly how and why the Toronto Maple Leafs became the NHL's biggest problem in 2025-26. A specific night in Washington. Let's start with one specific game, because it tells the entire story in miniature. The Maple Leafs travel into Washington to face the Capitals. Early on, they actually get a gift. An apparent Capitals goal in the opening 21 seconds gets waved off due to referee Kelly Sutherland's quick whistle on a still loose puck, a break that easily could have buried Toronto before the game even started. Instead, Toronto capitalizes. Morgan Rielly beats Logan Thompson on the very first shot of the game. Then Austin Matthews and Matthew Nyes connect off a strong penalty kill to make it 2-0, 2-0. On the road, against a divisional rival. Everything's going right, and in net, Joseph Woll is locked in making save after save, even as Washington starts to dominate play. By the 5-3 minute mark, Toronto is getting outshot 34-18, but the scoreboard still says they're winning. It looks, for a moment, like the goaltender is about to steal a game his team barely deserved to win. Then it falls apart. Uncleared pucks, unchecked players lurking in the crease, cross-seam passes that go completely untouched. Toronto's all-too-familiar defensive zone breakdowns rear their head at exactly the wrong time, and a 2-0 lead spirals into a 4-2 loss. Forward Matthew Nyes summed it up afterward. The team's consistency just hasn't been there for a full 60 minutes. And captain in spirit Morgan Rielly, who was directly responsible for allowing the tying goal, admitted they gave up too much, and that's simply what happens when you do. This is just one game, but it's the same game over and over again all season long. The pattern. Here's what makes this Washington loss so revealing. It's not an isolated incident. It's a microcosm of Toronto's entire identity crisis this season. Going into that game, the Maple Leafs hadn't posted back-to-back wins since November 5th. Think about that. An entire team, full of star talent, that simply could not put together 2 consecutive victories for months at a time. And the losses weren't always blowouts, either, which made them somehow more frustrating. The Maple Leafs had not won a single game within regulation in their previous 9 attempts. Every result was either a loss, or a scrape-together overtime or shootout win, frequently against weaker opponents who had no business hanging around that long. This is a team that, on paper, should have been finishing teams off. Instead, they were letting inferior opponents stick around just long enough to steal points or steal full wins. Coach Craig Berube pointed to missed opportunities as the difference, noting that his team had 3 breakaways in that Washington game alone and simply couldn't finish them. If we finish better tonight, we win this game, he said. Maybe. But as one analyst pointed out afterward, if the other team finishes better, which they so often did against Toronto all season, they don't just win, they win comfortably. By 3 or 4 goals, without much sweat at all. That's the core problem. This wasn't a team losing close, well-played games. This was a team that could be flat-out dominated on most nights, and only the scoreline made it look competitive. The numbers don't lie. If you want to understand just how serious Toronto's problem really was, you don't need to rely on the eye test. The numbers tell an absolutely brutal story. No team in the entire Eastern Conference surrendered more goals than the Maple Leafs this season. Not one. By the time the dust settled on the full 2025-26 campaign, Toronto had allowed 295 goals against the highest total for the franchise since the 1990-91 season. 35 years. That's how far back you have to go to find a Maple Leafs team this porous defensively. Their goal differential for the season finished at minus .46 and .83. Goal swing compared to the year before, when they'd posted a strong plus .37 differential and finished with 108 points as one of the better teams in the entire league. Let that sink in for a second. A team that was a legitimate Stanley Cup contender the previous season fell off a cliff so steep that their goal differential dropped by 83 goals in a single year. They led the entire NHL in shots against with 2,660 over the course of the season. Their record collapsed to 32 wins, 36 losses, and 14 overtime losses, good for just 78 points. That's a franchise record decline of 30 points in a single season, falling from first place in the Atlantic Division all the way down to 8th, and the season didn't end quietly either. Toronto closed out their year on a 7-game losing streak, their longest such streak since the 1957-58 season, capped off by a 3-1 loss to the Ottawa Senators that officially eliminated them from playoff contention. What went wrong? The off-season gamble. So how did a cup contender turn into one of the league's worst defensive teams in a single offseason? It starts with one massive roster decision. In the summer before this season, the Maple Leafs traded star winger Mitch Marner to the Vegas Golden Knights in a sign-and-trade arrangement. The idea, reportedly, was to shed a piece of the core that had repeatedly disappointed in the playoffs, create salary flexibility, and pivot toward a tougher, more defense-first identity under new head coach Craig Berube. On paper, it sounded like a reasonable plan. In practice, the defensive improvement the front office was banking on never actually materialized, and the team lost a huge chunk of its offensive dynamism in the process. Injuries compounded everything. Goaltender Anthony Stolarz battled an upper body injury and hadn't been seen on the ice in this particular stretch of the season since November 11th. Defenseman Chris Tanev, a critical piece of the defensive structure, missed extended time as well. And then, in the most devastating blow of the entire season, Captain Austin Matthews suffered a torn MCL on March 13th following a hit from Anaheim's Radko Gudas, ending his season entirely. Matthews had already been playing through previous physical issues and was being closely managed all year. When he finally went down for good, it removed any remaining margin for error from a team that had none left to spare. Goaltending, which had been one of Toronto's few reliable strengths in previous seasons, completely collapsed alongside everything else. Joseph Wolf finished the year with an .898 save percentage across 39 games, posting an 11-16 record. Anthony Stolarz posted an .893 mark in 26 appearances. The only goaltender on the roster who actually looked competent was depth option Dennis Hildeby, but he managed just 3 wins all season. When your goaltending, your defensive structure, and your franchise center all collapse in the same calendar year, this is what happened, the culture question. But here's where this story gets uncomfortable, because the numbers alone don't fully explain what happened in Toronto this season. Something deeper was wrong in that locker room. Multiple reports throughout the year pointed to a team that simply lacked structure defensively. There was no consistency in how the Maple Leafs defended their own zone constant, careless turnovers, breakdowns that no professional team should be making on a nightly basis. Coach Berube and veteran goaltender Anthony Stolarz both called the group out publicly on multiple occasions over the course of the season, demanding better defensive discipline. The message never seemed to sink in. And then, there's the question of compete level and accountability. The things that don't show up on a stat sheet but matter just as much. When Austin Matthews went down with that knee-on-knee hit from Radko Gudas, the on-ice response from his own teammates was muted. It took time and outside criticism before any real fight or emotion showed up from the group. Compare that to a team like the New York Islanders, where any contact near star rookie Matthew Schaefer drew an immediate physical response from his teammates defending him. Whether it was Stolarz taking matters into his own hands after getting run over by an opponent, rookie forwards absorbing shots without backup, or their captain getting seriously hurt without an immediate response from the room, this was a team that, by multiple accounts, simply didn't have each other's back the way contending teams typically do. That's not a tactics problem. That's not a goaltending problem. That's a culture problem. And culture problems are often the hardest ones for an organization to actually fix, the fallout. So what happens when a Stanley Cup or bust roster turns in the worst season of its core's entire era? Heads roll. On May 13th, the Maple Leafs fired head coach Craig Berube. Just one season after bringing him in specifically for his playoff pedigree and his reputation as a tough, defense-first coach, the exact identity this roster ultimately failed to embody on the ice. General manager Brad Treliving, who had constructed this roster and orchestrated the Marner trade, was also let go before the dust even settled on the season, leaving the franchise to search for answers heading into an offseason that one analyst bluntly described as a systemic erosion of defensive responsibility that the coaching staff never solved. The path forward isn't simple either. The goaltending tandem needs a complete overhaul. The blue line needs to get both cheaper and more effective, a difficult combination in a salary cap league. And somehow, the team needs to get tougher and more accountable without sacrificing the offensive talent that even in a lost season, kept their goals for total respectable. And hanging over every single decision this offseason is one unanswered question. Can Austin Matthews, the highest paid player in franchise history, actually stay healthy for a full 8-2 game season again? Because if the answer is no, no amount of roster tinkering on the back end is going to fix what's broken in Toronto. So what exactly is the Maple Leafs' problem that the entire NHL has been forced to watch unfold this season? It's not just one thing. It's everything at once. It's a defense that couldn't hold a lead, night after night, for an entire season. It's a goaltending tandem that collapsed under the weight of a porous structure in front of them. It's a franchise center who simply couldn't stay on the ice when his team needed him most. And underneath all of it, it's a locker room that by every account from inside that room never developed the cohesion, the accountability, or the fight that contending teams need when adversity actually shows up. Joseph Woll, even in the middle of the chaos, tried to find the right words. Play within the system, don't get frustrated, and let the team's difference makers eventually take over. But you can't talk your way out of allowing 295 goals. You can't talk your way out of the worst single-season decline in franchise history. At some point, the results have to speak for themselves, and this season they screamed. The Toronto Maple Leafs didn't just have a bad year. They became a cautionary tale for the entire league. A reminder that star power alone, without structure, accountability, and genuine team identity, will eventually catch up with you. And right now, every other front office in the NHL is watching Toronto's collapse and taking notes on exactly what not to do.